Lori Vallow Daybell has been sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murders of her two youngest children.
On June 9, 2020, in Rexburg, Idaho, FBI agents and local police descended upon a quiet rural property with search warrants and cadaver dogs. The homeowner and self-published religious author named Chad Daybell watched from the driveway as investigators combed through his backyard. At 9:47 a.m., a dog alerted near a fire pit. Officers began to dig. What they found was charred human remains, so badly burned that forensics teams would need dental records to confirm what everyone already feared. This was 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. Her body had been dismembered and set on fire. 3 hours later, another discovery, this time in a pet cemetery on the property. Wrapped in black plastic and duct tape, wearing red pajamas, was 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow. Both children had been missing for 9 months. Their mother, Lori Vallow, had told anyone who asked that they were safe, sometimes claiming they were in Arizona with friends, other times saying Tylee had died years earlier. But here's what makes this story truly chilling. Lori wasn't just a mother who snapped. She was a devoted caregiver, a beauty queen, a woman her friends described as the perfect mom. She once appeared on Wheel of Fortune, beaming about her wonderful husband and 2 beautiful children. So how did a woman who seemingly had everything, looks, charm, children she adored, end up burying those same children in shallow graves? To understand how Lori Vallow became one of America's most infamous killers, we need to go back to the beginning, back to when she was just a girl from California with dreams of a perfect family, back to before she met a man who would convince her that murder was God's will. This is the story of how love became obsession, how faith became fanatism, and how a mother's promise to protect her child became their death sentence. Lori Noreen Cox was born on June 26, 1973 in San Bernardino, California, into a devout Mormon family. Her parents, Barry and Janice Cox, were strict believers, but they also had a rebellious streak. They were tax protesters who adhered to sovereign citizen ideology, locked in a decades-long conflict with the IRS. Growing up, Lori was the all-American girl, pretty, outgoing, popular in school. She attended Eisenhower High School in Rialto, California, where she was known for her bubbly personality and her devotion to her faith. At just 19 years old, in 1992, Lori married her high school sweetheart. It seemed like a fairy tale. Young love, a temple wedding, the promise of forever. But the marriage collapsed almost immediately, ending in divorce within a year. For some people, a failed marriage at 19 would be a cautionary tale. For Lori, it was just the beginning of a pattern. In 1995, she married again. This time, the marriage lasted long enough to produce a son, Colby, born in 1996. But by 1998, husband number 2 was also history. Lori was working as a hairdresser, raising Colby on her own, and still searching for that perfect family she'd always dreamed of. In 2001, she thought she'd found it with Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr. Joseph adopted Colby and gave the family his name. In 2002, they welcomed a daughter, Tylee Ryan. Lori lit up when she talked about Tylee. Her mother later said, "One reason Lori had wanted to get married was to have another baby. So she got pregnant with Tylee right away, and she was really excited." From the outside, it looked perfect. But behind closed doors, the marriage was crumbling. Lori filed for divorce in 2004, making explosive accusations. She claimed Joseph had sexually abused both children. The claims were never substantiated, but the custody battle that followed was bitter and brutal. Lori's family rallied around her. Her brother Alex Cox became her fiercest protector, a role that would take on sinister significance years later. In 2004, during her divorce proceedings, Lori did something unexpected. She entered the Mrs. Texas beauty pageant, and she appeared on Wheel of Fortune, where she presented herself as a devoted wife and mother with 2 beautiful children living on 3 acres. The performance was flawless, but that's what Laurie was becoming, a performer. Then in 2006, everything changed. Laurie met Charles Vallow, a successful businessman, at a church function. Charles was kind, stable, financially secure. Everything Laurie had been searching for. They married quickly, and Charles adopted Colby. The family seemed complete. But Laurie wanted more. She wanted another child. So in 2014, she and Charles adopted Joshua Jackson Vallow, JJ for short, the biological grandson of Charles's sister, Kay Woodcock. JJ had autism and special needs, but friends say Laurie was patient, devoted, the ideal mother for him. Around this time, the family moved to Kauai, Hawaii. It should have been paradise, and for a while it was. But something was stirring in Laurie. Something dark, something that would soon consume everything and everyone in its path. Because in Hawaii, Laurie discovered the writings of a man named Chad Daybell. Chad Guy Daybell was born in Utah in 1968 and married Tammy Douglas in 1990. They had 5 children together and ran a small religious publishing company called Spring Creek Books. To anyone who knew them, they were a typical Mormon family living a quiet life in rural Idaho. But Chad had a secret, or rather, he claimed to have special knowledge. In his late teens and early 20s, Chad said he'd experienced near-death experiences, NDEs, that gave him a direct line to the spirit world. He claimed he could see the future, communicate with the dead, and had been shown visions of the end times. The apocalypse, he said, was coming soon. Chad poured these visions into self-published books with titles like Standing in Holy Places and 1 Foot in the Grave. His writing mixed mainstream Mormon theology with fringe apocalyptic beliefs. The books didn't make him rich, but they earned him a devoted following in pepper circles, people stockpiling food and supplies for the end of the world. Chad wasn't just writing fiction. He genuinely believed he was a prophet, and he attended preparedness conferences, gave podcast interviews, and gathered believers around him who hung on his every word. It was at one of these conferences in 2018 that Chad met his most devoted fan, Laurie Vallow. By this time, Laurie had become obsessed with Chad's books. Her friend, April Raymond, later recalled, she would talk about this author that she was really interested in and really connected with his work. I would describe her as a super fan. When they finally met in person, the connection was instant and electric. They started appearing together on Chad's podcast, discussing the end times, spiritual warfare, and their past lives. Because Chad and Laurie didn't just believe in the apocalypse, they believed they were key players in it. Chad told Laurie they had been married in past lives. He said she'd been married to the ancient prophet Moroni, that she'd lived as Mary French in the 1800s, that she was sealed to James the Just. He told her she had special powers, patriarchal powers that exceeded even the priesthood powers of men. More importantly, Chad told Laurie that she was the most powerful woman in the world, that she was one of the 144,000 chosen to survive the apocalypse, that together they would usher in Christ's second coming. For Laurie, this wasn't just religious talk. This was destiny. This was purpose. This was everything she'd been searching for her entire life. There was just one problem. They were both married to other people. But Chad and Laurie had a solution for that. They developed a belief system where certain people weren't really people at all. They were zombies. Humans whose original spirits had left their bodies, replaced by dark spirits. And the only way to free a zombie was to kill its physical body. Laurie's friend Melanie Gibb later testified, the term zombie refers to an individual whose mortal spirit has left their body and that their body is now the host of another spirit. The new spirit in a zombie is always considered a dark spirit. In the spring of 2019, Laurie started making zombie accusations, first against her husband, Charles, then against her children. The transformation was complete. Lori Vallow had gone from suburban soccer mom to doomsday prophet, and everyone standing between her and her divine destiny was about to become expendable. By early 2019, Charles Vallow was terrified of his own wife. In January, he returned home from a business trip to find his car missing and the locks changed. When police arrived, Charles told him something chilling. "She's threatened to murder me. She said you're not Charles. I don't know who you are, what you did with Charles, but I can murder you now with my powers." He filed for divorce in February, stating in court documents that Lori believed herself to be a god assigned to carry out the work of the 144,000 at Christ's second coming in July 2020. But Charles made a critical mistake. He didn't just walk away. He tried to get help from Lori. He tried to intervene. And in doing so, he became obstacle number one. On July 11, 2019, Charles came to Lori's home in Chandler, Arizona, to pick up JJ for school. What happened next depends on who you ask. According to Alex Cox, Lori's brother and longtime protector, Charles attacked him with a baseball bat, and Alex shot him in self-defense. According to prosecutors who would later review the evidence, Charles's death was a planned event and necessary to prevent Charles and others from confronting Lori about her extreme religious beliefs. Either way, Charles Vallow was dead, shot twice in the chest by Alex Cox in Lori's living room while 16-year-old Tylee was present. Alex called 911. The police investigated, and because it appeared to be self-defense, Alex was never charged. But here's the thing. Charles had a $1 million life insurance policy, and Lori believed she was the beneficiary. She wasn't. Charles had changed the beneficiary to his sister, Kay Woodcock, but Lori didn't know that yet. As far as she was concerned, Charles's death had just solved her financial problems and cleared the path to her destiny. Within weeks of Charles's death, Lori did something strange. She moved. She packed up Tylee and JJ and relocated from Arizona to Rexburg, Idaho, just miles from where Chad Daybell lived with his wife Tammy. Friends later testified that Lori and Chad were now calling themselves James and Alina, the names they believed they'd had in past lives. They developed an elaborate rating system to determine whether people were light or dark. They talked constantly about zombies and casting out evil spirits. And Lori started saying disturbing things about her children. In one phone call, Melanie Gibb heard Lori tell Tylee to watch JJ. When Tylee protested, Lori called her a zombie. Tylee responded, "Not me, Mom." But it was too late. In Lori's mind, Tylee had become dark when she was 12 or 13. Approximately the same time Tylee had become difficult to deal with. JJ was labeled a zombie when he climbed on kitchen cabinets and knocked a picture of Jesus off the refrigerator. On September 8, 2019, Lori, Alex Cox, Tylee, and JJ took a trip to Yellowstone National Park. There's a photo from that day showing Tylee standing by a river, smiling at the camera. It's the last known photo of Tylee Ryan alive. She was 16 years old. Phone records show that Alex Cox visited Chad Daybell's property the next day. Security footage shows him making multiple trips back and forth. On September 23, 2019, JJ attended Kennedy Elementary School in Rexburg for what would be the last time. That evening, Lori told Melanie Gibb that JJ had been acting like a zombie and that Alex Cox had taken him. Again, phone records place Alex at Chad Daybell's property that night. Neither child was ever seen alive again. But Lori and Chad had one more obstacle to remove. Tammy Daybell was 49 years old in October 2019. She was a librarian, a mother of 5, married to Chad for nearly 30 years. By all accounts, she was healthy, energetic, devoted to her family. On October 9, 2019, someone shot at Tammy with a paintball gun in the parking lot of her workplace. She reported it to the police as a possible mistake. Maybe kids playing around. She had no idea her husband and his lover were systematically removing everyone who stood in their way. 10 days later, on October 19th, Tammy Daybell went to bed and never woke up. Chad called 911 in the early morning hours, claiming he'd found his wife dead in bed. Their son Garth was home at the time and backed up the story. The coroner examined Tammy's body and initially determined her death appeared to be from natural causes. Chad declined an autopsy. 5 days later, after his wife of 30 years was buried, Chad Daybell married Lori Vallow on a beach in Hawaii. They wore leis and smiled for the camera. Neither brought family or friends. Lori's own mother, Janice Cox, would later say, "I don't think I knew that Lori married Chad Daybell until I saw it on TV." But someone else was watching too. Kay Woodcock, Charles Vallow's sister, and JJ's grandmother. She'd been trying to reach JJ for months. Phone calls went unanswered. Lori always had an excuse. Finally, in November 2019, Kay asked Rexburg police to do a wellness check. Officers showed up at Lori's apartment looking for JJ. Lori told them she was safe staying in Arizona with her friend Melanie Gibb. It was a lie. And when police called Melanie to verify, Melanie told them JJ hadn't been with her for months. Later, Melanie revealed that Lori and Chad had asked her to lie to police about JJ's whereabouts, and she'd refused. Now the police were suspicious. They returned to question Lori again. But when they arrived, Lori and Chad were gone. They'd fled to Hawaii, leaving behind an apartment full of children's belongings, including JJ's medication for her autism. As the investigation intensified, police began looking into Tammy Daybell's death. They found it suspicious that a healthy 49-year-old woman would die in her sleep weeks before her husband remarried. In December 2019, they exhumed Tammy's body for an autopsy. The results would eventually show that Tammy Daybell died of asphyxiation. She'd been smothered to death. Also in December 2019, another key player died. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, the man who'd shot Charles Vallow, the man whose phone records placed him at Chad's property when the children disappeared, was found dead in Arizona. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes, a blood clot in his lung. But the timing was convenient. Alex Cox would never testify about what he knew or what he'd done. Meanwhile, in Hawaii, Lori and Chad were living their best life. Beach trips, dinner dates, wedding photos. They'd collected Social Security benefits for both dead children, over $8,000, and seemed completely unconcerned that police were searching for Tylee and JJ. In January 2020, a judge ordered Lori to produce her children within 5 days. She didn't. On February 20th, 2020, Lori Vallow was arrested in Kauai, Hawaii, on charges of child desertion. She was extradited to Idaho, but even in custody, she refused to say where her children were. The question that gripped the nation was simple. Where are JJ and Tylee? By early 2020, the case had exploded into national headlines. Every major news network was covering it. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. The faces of JJ and Tylee were everywhere, and still Lori said nothing. Even her own mother, her son Colby, her extended family begged her to tell them where the children were. She remained silent. Chad and Lori's religious beliefs were now public knowledge. Court documents revealed their teachings about zombies, dark spirits, past lives, and the apocalypse. Former friends came forward to describe increasingly bizarre conversations about casting out demons and eliminating darkness. April Raymond told investigators part of her mission on Earth was to eliminate the darkness, the demonic, the evil. Melanie Gibb testified that Lori truly believed she had supernatural powers, and that Chad had reinforced these beliefs, telling her she was the most powerful woman in the world. But it wasn't just religious fervor. Prosecutors uncovered a trail of financial motives too. Charles Vallow had life insurance. The children's deaths meant Social Security payments. Tammy Daybell had a life insurance policy that paid out $430 to Chad. The puzzle was coming together. A couple who believed they were destined to lead the 144,000 chosen people into the millennium, who believed anyone who opposed them was possessed by dark spirits and who stood to gain financially from the deaths of those people. Text messages between Chad and Lori revealed they had nicknames for their victims. They referred to each other as James and Alina. They'd rated family members on a scale of darkness. They believed they were carrying out God's will, and they'd been planning it for months. On June 9, 2020, investigators executed a search warrant on Chad Daybell's property in Rexburg, Idaho. They were looking for evidence related to the missing children. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. First, they found Tylee, or what was left of her. Her remains had been dismembered, burned in a fire pit, and buried in Chad's backyard. The brutality was shocking. This wasn't a quick death. This was desecration. Then they found JJ wrapped in plastic and duct tape, buried in a pet cemetery on the property. He was still wearing his red pajamas. Both children had been dead since September 2019, since right after they moved to Idaho with their mother. For 9 months as the world searched for them, as their grandmother pleaded for information, as investigators chased leads across multiple states, JJ and Tylee had been buried in Chad Daybell's backyard. Chad was arrested immediately. He didn't show emotion. He didn't resist. He simply asked if he could change clothes before going to jail. Lori was already in custody in Idaho on child desertion charges. Now both faced murder charges. 3 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of conspiracy, grand theft, insurance fraud. But here's the thing that made this case even more disturbing. Chad's adult child defended him. His daughter Emma Murray told 48 Hours in 2021 that she believed her father had been framed by Alex Cox and Lori Vallow. He was framed. This is his property. If there's bodies buried here, it would be attributed to him, Emma insisted. The Daybell children attended court hearings in support of their father. They released statements defending his innocence. They claimed Lori had manipulated their father through emotional and sexual control. At the peak of this case, the world was watching a mother who'd murdered her own children, a man who'd participated in killing his wife of 30 years, and families torn apart by grief, disbelief, and denial. This was no longer just a criminal case. It was a window into how dangerous beliefs can become when mixed with narcissism, manipulation, and the willingness to do anything, even murder your own children, to fulfill what you believe is your destiny. The trials of Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell were separated by nearly a year. Lori's trial began on April 10, 2023, in Boise, Idaho. Prosecutors spent weeks laying out a timeline of death that left the courtroom in tears. They showed how Lori and Chad had systematically removed everyone who stood between them and their mission. Charles Vallow shot by Alex Cox, Tylee and JJ murdered and buried like trash. Tammy Daybell smothered in her sleep. On April 15th, photos of the children's remains were shown to the jury. Lori asked to be excused from court that day, claiming the images would be too traumatic. Judge Stephen Boyce denied her request, stating that as the defendant in a felony case, she must be present for all significant proceedings. So Lori sat there as the judge saw what she'd done to her own children, the son she'd once called our little JJ, the daughter she'd been so excited to have. Former friends testified about Lori's beliefs in zombies and dark spirits. Melanie Gibb, once Lori's closest confidant, told the court that when she'd grown uncomfortable with Lori's beliefs and tried to end their friendship, Lori had threatened to murder her and dispose of her body in trash bags. The evidence was overwhelming. Cell phone records placing Alex Cox at Chad's property when the children were buried. Text messages between Lori and Chad rating people on scales of darkness. Financial records showing Social Security payments collected for dead children. Autopsy results showing Tylee had been burned and dismembered. JJ had been asphyxiated with duct tape over his face. On May 12, 2023, all after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on all charges. 2 counts of first-degree murder for killing Tylee and JJ. One count of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Tammy Daybell. Grand theft for collecting Social Security benefits for the children she'd murdered. The courtroom erupted in tears. Larry Woodcock, JJ's grandfather, openly wept. But Lori showed no emotion. She sat perfectly still, her expression blank, as if she was somewhere else entirely. At her sentencing on July 31st, 2023, family members gave victim impact statements. Samantha G. William, Tammy Daybell's sister, spoke about her family that had been ripped apart by Tammy's death, how they'd been shocked when Chad remarried just weeks later, how they'd learned only through the autopsy that Tammy had been murdered. Colby Ryan, Lori's oldest son, addressed his mother directly. "Not only are my father, sister, and brother gone, but so is my mother. Starting 6 years ago, the horror began." He talked about how he'd believed his mother's lies about Charlie having an affair, how he'd stopped speaking to his father, how he'd never gotten to say goodbye. "Little did I know it was my mother having the affair all along. I regretfully decided to stop speaking to him. On July 11, 2019, I would be floored by the reality that my choice not to speak to him would be a lifelong sorrow." Then it was Lori's turn to speak, and what she said was perhaps the most chilling part of the entire case. Lori stood before the court and quoted Bible verses. She said, "Jesus knows me, and Jesus understands me. I mourn with all of you who mourn my children and Tammy." Then she said, "Jesus knows the truth of what happened here. No one was murdered in this case. Accidental deaths happen. Suicides happen." She described a near-death experience she claimed to have had while giving birth to Tylee in 2002, saying it gave her access to heaven and the spirit world. Since then, she said she'd had many communications from people now living in heaven, including my children. "I know for a fact that my children are happy and busy in the spirit world," Lori told the court. "Tylee had visited me. She's happy and free now. My friend Tammy Daybell is also very excited and extremely busy. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of guilt, no explanation, just the same delusional beliefs that had led her to murder her own children." Judge Stephen Boyce sentenced Lori Vallow Daybell to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 3 life sentences to run consecutively. "You had so many other options," Boyce told her. "You could have gotten divorced. You could have found someone else to take care of those kids. You chose the most evil and destructive path possible. You justified all of this by going down a bizarre religious rabbit hole, and clearly, you're still down there." Chad Daybell's trial began on April 10, 2024, almost exactly a year after Lori's conviction. Prosecutors painted him as a manipulator motivated by sex, money, and power. A man who saw his wife and Lori's children as obstacles to his rightful destiny. Chad's attorney, John Pryor, tried to shift blame entirely to Lori and Alex Cox, portraying Chad as a religious man who'd been lured into adultery and manipulated by a seductive, dangerous woman. The evidence told a different story. Text messages showed Chad and Lori planning the murders together. Financial records showed Chad had increased Tammy's life insurance policy shortly after her death. Cell phone records placed Chad at home when Tammy was killed. 2 of Chad's children, Emma and Garth, testified in their father's defense, claiming their mother had health problems and was getting tired extremely easily. But 3 of Tammy's co-workers testified that she seemed healthy and energetic right up until the day before her death. Tammy's sister said the same. Chad declined to take the stand. On May 30th, 2024, the jury found Chad Daybell guilty on all counts. 3 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. On June 1st, 2024, Chad Daybell was sentenced to death. Unlike Lori, Chad showed no emotion when the sentence was read. He declined to make a statement. The man who claimed to be a prophet, who'd said he could communicate with the spirit world and see the future, had nothing to say. But the story wasn't over, because the Arizona prosecutors had been waiting. Lori was extradited to face 2 more charges: conspiracy to commit murder in the death of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, and conspiracy to commit the attempted murder of Brandon Bordeaux, her niece's ex-husband. Brandon had been shot at in October 2019 as he drove to the gym. Someone in a Jeep, later identified as the vehicle Tylee drove, had opened fire on his car. He'd survived, but the message was clear. Anyone connected to the family who opposed Lori was a target. In a bizarre twist, Lori chose to represent herself at both Arizona trials. Despite having no legal training, she gave opening statements, cross-examined witnesses, and presented her own defense. The first trial for Charlie Vallow's death began on April 7, 2025. Lori presented the same story Alex Cox had told police, that Charles attacked him with a baseball bat and Alex shot him in self-defense. Prosecutors, however, had access to evidence that wasn't available in 2019. They showed how Lori had been planning Charles's death for months, how she told friends she was possessed by a dark spirit, how his death was necessary to clear the path for her to marry Chad and fulfill their religious prophecy. Kay Woodcock, Charles's sister, testified, Lori used religion as justification to kill Charles Vallow. On April 22nd, the jury found Lori Vallow Daybell guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Her second Arizona trial for Brandon Bordeaux's attempt murder followed in June 2025. Again, Lori represented herself. Again, the jury found her guilty. On July 25, 2025, Lori Vallow Daybell was sentenced to 2 additional life sentences in Arizona, to run consecutively with her Idaho sentences. She will never leave prison. As for Chad Daybell, he sits on death row in Idaho, awaiting execution. His children continue to maintain his innocence. In September 2025, a website called Letters from Chad appeared, featuring writings from death row, where Chad claimed he'd been portrayed unfairly and insisted, "I'm not a cult member who should be feared. I am not a conspirator or a killer." But the evidence speaks for itself. Victims continue to feel the ripples of all these crimes. At Lori's Arizona sentencing, Colby Ryan spoke about losing not just his father, sister, and brother, but his mother too. Starting 6 years ago, the horror began. Brandon Bordeaux described battling depression, fear, and paranoia since the attempt on his life. Had this heinous crime succeeded, my children would have been left to face a lifetime of grief. The family members who spoke at sentencing all echoed the same theme. Lori took everything from them, not just their loved ones, but their sense of safety, their ability to trust, their belief that mothers are supposed to protect their children. So here's the question we're left with. How does this happen? How does a beauty queen from Texas, a woman who appeared on Wheel of Fortune talking about her wonderful husband and beautiful children, become someone who buries those same children in shallow graves? The answer isn't simple, because Lori Vallow Daybell wasn't born a monster. By all accounts, she was a devoted mother for most of her children's lives. Friends described her as loving, patient, especially with JJ and his special needs. But somewhere along the way, something broke. Whether it was mental illness, narcissism, manipulation by Chad Daybell, or a genuine descent into delusional religious thinking, or all of the above, Lori crossed a line that most of us can't even comprehend. She convinced herself that her children weren't her children anymore, that they were zombies possessed by dark spirits, that killing them was an act of mercy, of spiritual warfare, of divine calling. And that's what makes this case so terrifying. It shows how easily faith can curdle into fanaticism when there are no guardrails, how love can twist into obsession, how belief in a higher purpose can be used to justify the most evil acts. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints issued statements distancing themselves from Chad and Lori's beliefs, calling them extreme and dangerous distortions of church doctrine. But the damage was done. 2 children were dead, 3 spouses were murdered, families were destroyed. Today, when people ask about the Vallow Daybell case, they're really asking a deeper question. Could this happen to anyone? Could normal, faithful people spiral into murder if they fall under the influence of someone claiming to speak for God? The uncomfortable answer is, maybe. If you're vulnerable enough, isolated enough, desperate enough for meaning and purpose, if you meet someone charismatic who tells you you're special, chosen, destined for greatness, if you surround yourself with people who reinforce your most extreme beliefs instead of challenging them, Lori Vallow Daybell will spend the rest of her life in prison, convinced she did nothing wrong, still believing her children are happy and busy in the spirit world. Chad Daybell awaits execution, still claiming he was framed, still insisting he's a man of God. And somewhere in Arizona, Colby Ryan is trying to rebuild a life shattered by the mother who raised him, loved him, and then destroyed everything he held dear. This is the story of how promises of protection became instruments of death, how a mother's love became a murder weapon, how faith, twisted beyond recognition, demanded blood. And in the end, the cult got exactly what it wanted. A trail of bodies and a prophet destined for martyrdom, convinced even now that they were serving a higher power. The scariest part? They still believe it.